Right, so I guess, yeah, we can get started. Essentially, the idea of today's talk is to give the audience a flavor of how AI is being transforming the food industry and specifically the CPG, which is the consumer packaged goods. Companies like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, etc., who essentially manufacture millions of products and how exactly AI can be used for transforming that. So before I get into all that, let's talk a bit about AI, machine learning, and deep learning, right? Obviously, these topics have been picking up in the recent 5 years, I would say, at a very rapid pace. There has been a lot of work which is coming from the academic space. In terms of the company side, also, you can see a lot of applications of AI emerging, a lot of startups that are coming up. And no wonder AI is becoming like one of the major popular topics. And the another interesting comparison here is with TikTok. So you can see TikTok started essentially in this 2017, and then it started rising up, but AI still remains on top of that. And how exactly we are using the AI in everyday life? Well, there are multiple applications, right? When you are opening up an email, there's a spam filtering, which happens. It's a classification algorithm. You have the conversational AI, which is picking up the voice to text feature is happening on the voice side. Then you have the transactions when you're using any card for that matter. I used to work previously at Visa, and that's where we would identify the fraud and the other anomaly transactions being done on your using your card or using your Apple Pay or whatever. Then on the social networking side, you have the different image analytics, the computer vision algorithms that suggest you, for example, who are the friends that you should be tagging in the images. And finally, in the and the ride sharing apps. And these are just some of the things which you use on an everyday basis. The idea of this slide is basically to help you understand how exactly your life is being surrounded by AI, even though you might not know about it or you might be using it without understanding it. And that's why AI as a topic becomes really, really important if you have to understand the implications or the applications of it. And the difference among AI, ML, and DL, again, it's very rudimentary, but at the same time, it is something that should be clear in everyone's head. Artificial intelligence, as we know, it's more about artificially creating a intelligence or mimicking the human intelligence. It can be a simple if-then rule, which is also a kind of artificial intelligence, or it can be decision tree or deep learning or machine learning. While machine learning, on the other hand, is a subset of the artificial intelligence that essentially is more about the statistical techniques that you use, where you feed in a certain amount of data and then it becomes better at predicting those tasks or giving the certain output. The deep learning, on the other hand, is now the niche which is coming up. I'll talk about the reason of why deep learning has become more and more popular, what are the reasons behind it. And again, in this particular case, using the artificial neural network, the machine itself is able to understand and outperform itself. A classic example being Google DeepMind beating a Go champion. Go is a very popular game. It's similar to chess, but it's more complex in terms of the different possibilities or the different moves that are there at one particular point of time. And that's where deep learning is now becoming hugely popular in the AI space. Okay, I mean, this is again additional comparison slide where you can see that, okay, ML, the classic ML is the regression and all that, which starts from where you're trying to predict the weight or the height part and you're plotting your regression lines on top of it. While the deep learning is more at a level where you are trying to reconstruct or deconstruct the features out of a particular data set, which can be quite complex. For example, given a face input, there are multiple layers which are analyzing the low level features, certain mid level, which you can see here, and then high level features. Okay, I think that was just a short intro about the AI ML, which I'm sure the audience, you guys are already aware about, but just as a refresher, I wanted to introduce. Let's deep dive now and jump into the CPG space, which is the consumer packaged goods. It has the different companies, you would have either had multiple products of these companies, which is Nestle, Kellogg's, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, etc. They have numerous brands under them, often varying from geography to geography. And these are some of the major ones which essentially occupy the entire market. And the biggest problem in the CPG industry currently is that the 90% of the CPG product fail in the first year itself. What this translates to is that next time you visit a shopping complex, or if you visit a supermarket, 9 out of every 10 products in, or let's say any one product that you pick will have a, only like 10% chance of the success, while it is highly likely that, okay, out of the 10 items which are there on a particular shelf, 9 of them are failing in the first year itself, and you will not see them again, right? And this is a very high failure rate if you think about it, because I mean, this industry is one of the most basic industries in terms of the food. This is one of those industries that was able to withstand the COVID, but in spite of that, a lot of the food products or the CPG products, they continue to fail. Now, why does that happen? And okay, I'll get into the why part, but let's talk about the current process of how exactly a product is actually developed, right? There are multiple stages to it. The first starts with the conceptualization, where uh, the company itself tries to employ either an agency or an in-house service to, come up with what kind of concept that they should be launching in the market. So this involves a little bit of market research. It also involves leveraging the agency who can do certain surveys and identify what are the different things that are popular in the particular market and the category. Then once they have identified on the concept, then comes the prototyping. Prototyping is essentially you are creating a product, a mock product out of it, which you obviously are doing it at a smaller scale, and you try to get iterative testing done on the same, and finally you are able to come up with the finished product. Then on the optimization part is where, you are doing these multiple iterations, you are identifying what works, what doesn't work, and then once you have identified all that, then comes your production at the larger scale, where once you have everything ready, that okay, this is the kind of product you should be launching, say orange flavored matcha juice, for example, right? Or say a matcha flavored cola, right? Now you have already came up with this concept, you prototype like one of the samples, you do like a small level testing, you identify what works, what doesn't work, you bring back the feedback, you optimize it, and then finally, once you have identified that, okay, this is the point where the customer satisfaction is there, then you go ahead and start productionalizing it. Now, breaking down the conceptualization part, which essentially is more about the new product development. Again, it can be broken down into two separate segments. One is the consumer need analysis. So consumer need, you can think of it in a way that it is what the need of the consumer is, right? Why people consume what they consume. For example, if I am having, say, an orange juice, maybe I want to satisfy my thirst, or maybe I am coming from a gym, or I'm needing it for the fitness reasons, right? So these are the needs of the consumer, or the consumer need, which can essentially be the sensory need, the functional need, or the emotional need. So the sensory needs are related to the taste, color, smell, texture of the product. The functional need is more related to the function of that product. How does that product help you in functioning? Is it giving you energy? Is it making you happy, etc.? And then finally, on the emotional side, where you have what is the emotional state of yours when you're consuming that product? Maybe you are feeling more energetic or more excited when you are having, say, Red Bull, or or it could be something which you like to have in isolation, say beer to yourself or something like that, right? So this is where the consumer need analysis is carried out. And again, the way FMCG companies today go about it is that they give a briefing to an agency, then the agency talks to 100 to 200 consumers. The recruitment of that sample itself takes anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. Finally, they do a sample study. They have their own set of questionnaire where they essentially ask questions about, okay, will you like this product? They have their own set of questions, ranging from what do you think about the flavor of this product, what do you think about the packaging of this product, etc., etc. And then finally, on the basis of all that, they do the analysis and they come up with what are the consumer need this particular product is satisfying. Once they have done all that, they come up with the concept generation. The way you can think of a concept is what you see on an e-commerce channel, for example. when you go to any e-commerce website, let's say Amazon or a Coop, which is really popular in the Switzerland, for example, or the the German region, there you can see that for every product which is listed on the platform, you have a certain description about it. You have the image of the product, you have the name of the product, and then of course the SKU, price, etc. So all of that is essentially what a concept is, right? It's essentially what you're trying to sell to the consumers, that these are the different information about that product. Now, doing all of that, which currently happens manually, again, varies, because once you have identified the consumer need, you still need to create a product out of it. And that's where, again, they leverage another external agency or an internal team to, go through the briefing, then ideate on the same. And then finally, once they have identified it, then they try to have a mock screening of the concept, which again happens through a limited set of consumers, say 100 to 200 set of consumers, and then they try to identify whether this particular product is going to work in the market or not. So, and this entire process, anyway, takes between 3 to 6 months of this conceptualization part. This is another example where I have taken, say, uh, Granular Thailand and Kellogg's. So if Kellogg's wants to launch the next flavor of the granular in the Thailand market, how will they go about it currently? So firstly, they will try to identify the trends for the granular by talking to 50 to 200 consumers. The sample set again is either given or derived by the agency, or sometimes they only have their own connections using which they identify a sample set of the consumers. Uh, then they try to identify the consumer needs, which I talked about. They try to identify what the consumers are really looking out for. They also try to look at the demographics and the consumption setting. Again, it can be driven by the on-ground team, or it can be the external agency who is driving all of this. When it comes to the prediction, right? So let's say if Kellogg's finally has decided that they are going to launch, say, a dark forest granular into the market. Now they don't have any prediction metrics currently. It's many of the times it's more of a gut-based decision. Obviously, they have data to back it up when they are looking back, but they don't really know how it is going to perform in the future. And finally, the concept development achieve again, this part comes with the help of the internal design thinking session that they might have, or again, they might be leveraging certain external agencies. Uh, then coming on to the challenges of the CPG industries as a whole. So as you can see, what they really want to cut down on is the time. Time is of essence to them. And since the consumer needs are changing very, very fast, the consumer preferences are changing really, really fast, it becomes really important to launch the products faster, right? And so time is of essence to these companies. The second important factor for them is to create the successful product, because those 90% of the failure rate, which I talked about in the very beginning, out of those 50% of the product fail because they are not meeting any consumer need, right? Which essentially means that there was not any need of that product in the market, or the product was not able to sufficiently capture the need, existing need of the consumers for that market. So in the case of, say, granula itself, the dark forest granula, if we are coming up with that concept, it is a 50-50 chance that it is not able to capture the needs of the consumers. Again, based on the current method, this is what it boils down to. These two are the sample products which were launched. One of them is the Cheetos lip balm that was launched by the Cheetos company, and another one is Pepsi Atom. Pepsi Atom is very close to heart because it was launched in my home country, India. Pepsi did quite extensive work for this particular product. They did research in the 4 regions of India, from north, south, east, and west. They spent close to 1 million alone on doing a proper research about it, and in the different multiple cities they employed lots of sample set of the people, but ultimately the product bombed like anything. And what this means, or what this translates to, is that the current ways have their own limitations and they are not able to scale up. And now in the post COVID world, the way the market research was being done previously also has to evolve. And not just this, the another challenge of CPG industry is the evolving competition. There are more startup threats that are coming on. There are D2C brands which are directly having closer access to the consumers, and they are able to understand the consumer needs better. A classic example is the Dollar Shave Club, which came up with the subscription model for the shaving kit, right? And Unilever, in the very beginning, the Gillette brand, which they own, it really scoffed them, saying that, okay, they really can't, they don't really have any business model and they won't be able to compete with the Gillette as a brand. But then, since they did not understand the consumer need properly, and Dollar Shaving Club, on the other hand, was able to successfully tap into the consumers that they will be open to the subscription model. They finally went on to become a unicorn and ultimately got acquired by Unilever itself. So I think that shows that how important it is for the CPG industry to understand this threat and, try to either employ these different technologies which are out there and rather embrace these technologies, and at the same time work with the startups who are already trying to do the same. So now I'll talk more about how the AI as a field has been evolving, and then what makes it possible, what makes this particular timestamp as the ripe time or the right time for the innovation in the FMCG product innovation space, right? So the first reason is that the 90% of the data which exists today was created in the last 2 years itself. And this data is going to increase by leaps and bounds in the coming years. One of the major reasons is, of course, the internet accessibility, which has really transformed not just the developed economies, but the developing and the underdeveloped economies. So the Southeast Asia region is a classic example where a lot of the users are directly moving to the mobile. Because of the mobile first internet, they are able to get onto the internet as a platform and able to generate a lot of data, which is essentially a gold mine for any AI algorithm, right? And if you look at the data which used to exist a decade ago, I think there were few social platforms. There was very niche platforms that used to be there in terms of the data collection, even in terms of, say, restaurant delivery and the cab delivery and all that. Nothing used to be there. But now if you fast forward to 2020 and 2021, you can see a lot of the things have changed. The technology access has become really, really quick. With the click of a button, you can order a cab, you can order your food. And that's where a lot of the data is actually getting generated, which is helping the AI as a field to transform even better. Just to give an example, every second you have 1 million people who are logging into the Facebook, and then the different stats related to all the social platforms, the retail platforms, the entertainment platforms, the search platforms, the gaming, and so on and so forth. The other reason, obviously, is the emergence of the cloud platform. We have seen how AWS really took head start in this particular space, and then Azure and Google were quick to follow it up. And especially GCP with its ML capabilities has been quite transformative. The way they have been investing in the AI's applications and the AI spaces, and also at the same time improving the functionalities of their Google Cloud platform. I think that has been really commendable. At the same time, Amazon also has been coming up with a lot of the new features which are able to help the data scientists and the data engineers who are working on the core ML problems. Coming on to the AI applications in the CPG, right? So I talked a bit about the product development and sourcing, and this is where AI palette is also essentially trying to tackle the problem. But at an overall level, what the problems translate to and how exactly AI can be used is the trend prediction, the ingredient discovery, or the DNA sequencing for supply chain traceability. On the manufacturing side, we are seeing a lot of the AI applications coming up, especially in terms of the robotic manufacturing or the predictive factory maintenance where it is being produced, or quality control. Then the classic ones which have been there for quite some time, but now are booming, obviously, with the incoming more data and more IoT devices that are coming into the picture. You have demand forecasting and micro fulfillment, etc. And then there's another transformation happening on the sales and the marketing, where you're getting better recommendation algorithms. You're getting a lot of the conversational AI in terms of the product discovery and the agents. A lot of the shelf intelligence is being driven by the computer vision algorithms. AI-enabled IoT devices are coming up. So a lot of the evolution is happening. And like I mentioned to you before, it's only becoming possible because of the data itself and also of the way that we are able to work on this data, which is essentially the cloud platforms. So before moving on to the next section, I would like to essentially iterate or reiterate the word of the Ginny Rometty, who was the CEO of the IBM, and she essentially talks about that, how AI is essentially going to enhance Earth intelligence itself, right? So it's not there to replace us, or it's not there to take away our jobs, but rather than that, it is going to help us in the better decision making, and it will create new opportunities or new jobs out of the the existing ones, right? For example, the self-driving cars might be replacing the drivers, but at the same time they might create some new opportunities in terms of the the space. So I think that is what this particular quote is trying to capture. Now, coming on to the AI Pilot core offering. So like I mentioned to you before, we are playing in the product concept generation space, which is part science and part art, to be honest. But now with the AI capabilities that are coming up, especially in the generation part, and that is where we are able to build our solutions and cater to our customers. So AI Pilot essentially at an overall level is going to generate the the product concept, the new product concepts, leveraging the consumer needs and the brand personality. So what this means is, let's say if Pepsi tomorrow wants to launch a new drink for the Indonesia market or the Thailand market, a platform can tell them what kind of drink or the what kind of product concept they should be launching next in the market. And we do this by leveraging the consumer needs from the public data and the brand personality and portfolio, etc., from the company data. So coming on to the AI pilot data, like what is this data that I'm talking about, right? How exactly we can leverage this data? So if you think about food, now food is one of the most popular topic online, right? People have to talk about food on social media, e-commerce, menus, recipes, etc. During the entire COVID time, I think it saw a huge boom in terms of the home cooking because most of the people were cooking at home and couldn't really eat outside in the restaurants and other spaces. And that's where food is one of those industry which is very very basic. Like I mentioned before, it was one of those industries that was least hit by the COVID, and it continued to uh, boom for the and give a way to the FMCG companies. And coming on to the AI pilot data sources, so what are the sources on the public side that we really try to tap on? So this is an example of Thailand, where essentially we analyzed close to 6.8 million data points for 100 plus ingredient. So obviously we look at the social media, but then in addition to that, we also look at the search engines, the recipe and the review sites, the news and the discussion forums, and then finally the retail. So these are all the sources where you can find a lot of the food products. On the retail, you can find the finished food products. On the recipe and the review, you can find what is there happening in the cafes or in the restaurants or in the fine dining space. The news and the discussion forums can help you in understanding what exactly the consumers are really talking amongst themselves. Search can help you in understanding what people are really searching for, right? And then social media, of course, is where people have to post about what dish they are cooking or what kind of things are really coming up in the food space. And in terms of the technology, so now, this is one quote from Bill Gates, which he spoke about in the couple of years back, which is that the biggest breakthrough in AI is going to come when the computer can read and understand information like the humans do, right? Which essentially is what NLP is all about. Right, and if you look at the world's top languages, there are more than 6,900 spoken languages, right? Uh, but there are the dominant 10 languages which 3 billion people out of the 7 billion speak. Again, these are the popular ones like the Mandarin, Urdu, English, Spanish, etc. And out of them, but on the internet, although we see English being the dominant language, but then of course Chinese or the Mandarin is not far behind, and then after that you have Spanish and the others languages. Now what this means is that you can't build your solution only for the English language, right? Because apart from the English, you can see there's a lot of languages which are out there. So whatever the NLP models that you're working on, they can't just be restricted to only English. And that is where the AI pilot is trying to transform that. We look at the NLP in the various languages that are out there. So We call ourselves language agnostic in the sense that we have the language specific models which are trained on the food related data set. So which means that we are not just restricted only to English, but we look at the difficult Asian languages like Thai, Korean, Mandarin, where you don't even have the English characters. But on top of it, we also look at the European languages, like the languages like German, French, etc., and of course the English and the others, right? And why this is important is because food is very, very local, right? If you think about food, the what people are having in Germany versus what people are having in France will be completely different. Similar is the case in Asian geographies as well, that whatever people are having in Indonesia will be completely different from what people are having in Thailand. And that's why it becomes really important to understand what the local people are talking about it by identifying and having your models which are able to understand the native languages, right? So that's where we do, whenever we are collecting the data, we try to make sure that the data is restricted to the native language of that particular region. And that's where we use the language detection capabilities. And on top of it, then we run our different models, which are able to identify the different entities, the sentiment, etc., from it. On top of it, we also look at the emojis sometimes because many on the social media, especially, people love to talk via emojis, right? And that's why it becomes really crucial to not just remove the emojis in the cleanup, but actually to include them so that it can help you in understanding what people are really talking about a particular food product for that matter. So coming on to the NER modeling, of course, you try to identify what are the different entities that are being talked about. You can identify what are the ingredient that is there, what is the consumer need that is being talked about, and other such details, right? So for example, in this particular case, you are interested in the dark chocolate granula because that is what is coming out. And then you can see chia seed is another ingredient which is going into the same. What are the different challenges? Well, NER itself is not that easy, and the complexity increases, of course, with the language. So, for example, in this particular case, you can see Apple CEO Tim Cook, who entered the conference podium while eating an apple. So now the entity needs to determine that, okay, this apple while is being talked about the fruit, and this particular apple is the company itself, right? So these are the challenges that we normally face when it comes to it. And the way we try to mitigate them is, of course, by training our data on the food related data set so that it is the more data we have on the food as a corpus, the better our algorithm will be able to identify the entities, the better algorithm will be able to classify it, the better algorithm will be able to give it a sentiment score for that matter. And then again, the challenge becomes tenfold when you start doing it for the different languages which are out there, and and while trying to do the aspect based sentiment in the non-English languages. So for example, this particular case, which is in Thai, it's talking about the best Wi-Fi and the ambience, but it's only for the Wi-Fi, but the food they are talking about in the worst sense. So if you look at the overall thing, then it might give it an average score or maybe even positive score, but that is not really the case. In this particular case, you need to do the aspect-based sentiment analysis to identify that this particular product is being talked about in a negative sense. The other challenge that we continuously face is the joint multilingual NLP, where you might have, say, English and Thai coming here together in one sentence. Now, this again becomes a challenge because usually the NLP models are supposed to be restricted to a single language when you're trying to work on it. But when you have these cases, that's where you need to split the data first and then run the separate model for the separate section. And again, in many of the languages or in many of the countries like Philippines, for example, people love to switch between the English and the Tagalog. So Tagalog is the native language of the Filipino people, and this is again becomes tricky because you have to maintain a model which can understand this mix sort of a language. A similar thing happens in India as well, where people use a lot of the English. English is nothing but Hindi plus English, where people use the Hindi, which is one of the scripts or the languages, but they use them with the Latin characters. So now, the transformation and everything becomes completely different. Although the meaning remains same when you read it, but the data set on which you have to train now has to be completely different. So these are the kind of complexities which you encounter when you're trying to do native language NLP. Then the other challenges which we face is, of course, in the image analytics. But I mean, I'll come on to the challenges later on. But the way how we leverage the computer vision algorithms is to understand more context and identify the insights. For example, it could be the age and the gender of what people are really consuming. It can be the occasion, like, whether it's a barbecue or it's a party, a COVID party in these cases, or even a Zoom party for that matter. Then the complementary food, right? What people are really having in complement with the in the different sections. Let's say they're having burger and coke or burger with fries, etc., etc. And that's where we have the different neural networks which are able to identify these the objects out of it. And of course, we have our own training models that we have built over the time by collecting more and more of this data. Many of the times, because we collect the data and we already have a textual information with it, we are able to easily label that. And then later on, we can use that as a training data set. The challenges which come, well, numerous challenges again on the image, because image might not be homogeneous in nature. For example, in this particular case, and this usually happens for Thailand, where a lot of the people have this fascination for naming their puppies or their pets with the food names. So a lot of the dogs or the cats will have the name, say Pepsi or Cola, etc., etc. So then it can give you a lot of false positives when you're trying to do this analysis, right? And even the best of the computer vision models can fail when you're trying to work on these problems. And that's where I think it becomes really bit challenging for us. But then again, who doesn't like challenges? So the team here at AI Palette has been consistently trying to build the models which are able to mitigate certain these challenges. Then the final part on the technology that we leverage into is the predictive analytics. Using the predictive analytics, we are able to identify how the trends are really going to pick up in the future. We have our own 39 unique factor, which come from the advisors and the domain understanding. And using this, we try to predict the AI palette coffee trends in the 2019. And surprisingly, most of our predictions were on point. Again, these predictions can be vastly affected by any black swan event. Uh, but of course, if the things are running smoothly per se, then these 39 unique factors are pretty much good indicator of how the trend is going to go in the future. So while we don't give you month by month analysis, we will be able to give you an idea of how this trend is going to go up or down or remain constant in the future. Again, the challenging part is the onset of the black swan event, which can make all of your predictions go out of the window. uh, and of course, the events like COVID-19 are once in a lifetime event, which can definitely screw up any prediction model that is out there. Right. So I think that's pretty much it. I have this last slide for the audience to help them in kickstarting their career in data science, if any data science enthusiasts are listening to it. So I think it's all about breathing and living the AI in what you do. If you remember, one of my earlier slides talked about how AI, how you are using AI without realizing that you are using it, right? So I think the bottom line should be you try to understand it, that every day in life, how exactly AI is helping you in making your decisions, and then try to understand the science behind it, the mathematics behind it. The best way is to go about the different, the literature that is already out there. So Introduction to Machine Learning by Andrew Ng is a very fantastic course that you can do on the Coursera. There are multiple MOOCs which are available on the Coursera, edX, and Udemy. On top of it, you should definitely brush up your Python skills, your cloud computing skills, because building a model is definitely one thing, but then I think it's really crucial to understand how exactly it is being deployed. And I think that's a very useful skill, because then you don't really need to rely upon the DevOps team. You can yourself do the deployment, understand where exactly the blocker is, and make it more parallelizable or in the processing part. On top of it, you can try out the open source projects which are out there. A fantastic work is being done in all of the different spaces. Like many of the major companies themselves, like the Google and the Facebook, are coming out with the open source projects, and I think that is where you can start contributing. Then there are certain apprenticeship programs. If anybody is listening from the Singapore, there's this AI Singapore program. I'm sure these programs are out there all over the world. So I think that also definitely helps you a lot. Working as an intern in the early stage AI startups, I think that's really important and crucial, because I think once you start working in these AI startups, you will get pretty much hands-on experience, which you might not be able to get in a very big company. And for example, couple of interns actually started working on the NLP, and now they are actually converted into full-time employees with us. And I think that's how you are able to grow together with the company. As and when the startup is growing, you are also able to grow in your role. And I think it's a very easy way to understand the application of AI if you're really looking for that kind of work. Then finally, it's all about the blogs, the forums, and the discussions, news, etc. LinkedIn has multiple fantastic sources. I think the Data Clubs is another one fantastic platform which can help you in understanding all these discussions, or it provides a forum for the same. Similarly, on the Medium, there are different blogs. Towards Data Science is one of the major one which I subscribe to. Then the other one is, of course, the meetups and the conferences to attend the which you can attend to meet the like-minded people. Of course, in the post-COVID world, most of these things have shifted online, which actually helps you because now you don't even need to travel to a different country or a place. You can sitting in the Germany, you can listen to the speakers from Singapore, like in this case, or vice versa for that matter. So I think this is definitely going to democratize the way education is being accessed or the information is being shared. And I think we'll see a lot of these virtual conferences becoming a part of our daily lives. And then finally, the cold reach out to the experts on LinkedIn, or going out on a coffee or having an online meeting with them. Of course, this will have a high failure rate, but then again, you don't really need 100% success rate on this. Even if like one person out of the 100 that you approach helps you out, I think that will be worth the effort. And I think many of the people on LinkedIn community, especially in the data science space, are happy to help each other out. And I think that's also one of the ways in which you can leverage the fantastic network that is already out there. So I guess okay, this is more information about the AI pilot. Yeah, you can definitely follow us on Medium and LinkedIn for the work that we are doing. You can go through our blogs where we have written about some of our data science work in the NER space, the predictive modeling, etc. Yeah, and I guess that's pretty much it. I'll stop sharing now. And yeah, Alexi, I hope I did not bore you guys.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. Thanks a lot for presenting. That was interesting. To me, like before I start with questions, I found that like all these things like design thinking, product management that I'm used to seeing at work at
Right.
IT companies, I just realized just today, when listening to your talk, that it's actually coming from, this old-fashioned, not internet products, right? All this like market validation, all these steps, and
Right, right, right.
complex there. Like that, the amount of time you need to spend to do market research and all that is it's a lot harder
Yeah,
to do that
true,
in the
true.
physical world than uh, on the internet. Like on the internet, you just
True.
go ahead and change a button and then experiment, right? But here
Yeah,
it's
yeah, I know. Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest challenges I think with the CPG industry, and especially in a post-COVID world where now you can't really do like a survey like you used to do before, and then finding that the set of the sample people who are not truly representative of the entire population, and then at the same time you want to crunch down the time, right? You want to reduce the time in launching a product. So I think these multiple challenges are forcing them to adopt the digital solutions. And I think that's where a lot of the adoption is happening in the AI, because a lot of the data is already out there. It's not being leveraged to the full usage. And I
Mhm,
think that's where AI can play a very dominant role in the coming years for the CPG industry.
mhm. And that brings us to a question we have about data sets.
Okay.
So I think you did mention that you did answer this question. What are the
Yep.
public data sets with consumer needs that you use and how we can access them? So I think you did answer that, like you basically use
Yep.
social media. right?
Right. So it's a combination of the different sources. Social media is of course one of the major ones.
Mhm.
Then on top of it, we also look at the food review sites or the recipes platforms,
Mhm.
and the e-commerce channels also wherever the food products are being talked about. Since we are majorly
Mhm.
focused on that, search data is another important
Mhm.
like data set that we leverage. So it's a combination of the different
Okay.
sources, I would say. And then the collection again, happens through either if you have the API for that particular platform, then
Mhm.
you subscribe to the API. If the API is not there, then you either use a third-party data provider or you use some sort of a web scraping to get the data. So
Mhm.
it's a combination of all that.
Just curious, follow-up question on that from me personally.
Mhm.
Like, let's say you get this Twitter stream or Instagram stream with data, but then you need to understand which post is about food and which is not. I assume you have some sort of a binary
Right.
classification model there, or
Right.
how
A
does it
good
work?
point. So the way that the good thing about the Instagram itself as a platform is that it has this capability of the hashtags, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, using the hashtags, we are able to, when we are collecting the data, we are looking for the hashtags which are related to the food, of course. But on top of it, once the data comes, we have our own cleaning modules which are able to clean the data and make sure that this data is only related to the food. We have our own tagging algorithms, like you rightly mentioned, the binary classification. It is able to identify whether this is a is beverage or whether is this is snack, etc., etc. You have the different food categories which are out there. So yes, we have that model which is able to essentially
Mhm.
classify and give it a rating that okay, this is a food related data set.
Okay. And how many images with dogs that looks like Coca-Cola bottles do you have?
I think that was a isolated issue for the Thailand market, especially.
Okay.
I think Thailand was like crazy because people dress up their pets in weird things, and we saw all these cases, like all these false positive coming up, and from there, because we saw like cola seemed like a growing trend, or rather like an emerging trend with like a lot of posts coming up, and this kind of confused us because cola, if you think about it, it's a very mature trend, right? It has been there since ages. There's not much innovation currently happening in the cola. Of course, in the other space it is happening. And I think that is where the tipping point came. And then we decided to actually go through the underlying data. And that's where we started realizing, okay, I mean, our model needed certain retuning and all. And yeah, I think it was quite huge, I think. And that's where we have now tried to fit in certain criteria that we augmented with the textual data. For example, in the textual data they might express an emoji which is related to a dog, for example, or maybe they will express something like a nickname of the dog, or sometimes they can even put in like say hashtag puppy or hashtag dog. So then we are able to filter out those using the textual information which is related to the image rather than from the image itself.
But that was a memorable picture.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so the next question we have is trends in food represents consumer needs that are already met. So people tweet about good coffee they already bought. How does one find unmet consumer needs?
Right. That's a pretty good question. So the way the food trends essentially flow. So FMCG companies or the CPG companies are not the innovators of the food. The real innovators of the food are the chefs, the baristas, and the bartenders. So these are the people in the the food industry who essentially come up with a new combination, a new dish, or a new mocktail or a cocktail for that matter, right? And once a thing gets popular in the restaurant space or in the fine dining space or at the home cooking space, that is when it gets adopted by the QSR space. So QSR is the quick service restaurant, the companies like McDonald's, KFC, Starbucks, etc. So then they try to adopt the trends, and then finally, once a trend becomes hugely popular in the KFC and all of this QSR space, that is that is when it essentially gets transferred or gets picked up by the CPG companies, right? So, and as you can see, it takes a bit of a time for the trend for the CPG companies to essentially identify that this particular trend or this particular consumer need has actually become huge. What AI Pilot is trying to do is we are looking at the source itself. So as and when the trends are becoming popular in the culinary space or in the home cooking space, etc., we are able to identify the consumer needs from there, which are in the market, but at a very small level, right? It has not become hugely popular, but it's there at the cusp of it. And then using our own models, which are able to look at how that ingredient, how the other related ingredients have performed in the past, how that particular, what kind of need that particular that particular ingredient is satisfying, etc., etc. We are able to give it a prediction score, or we are able to identify that, okay, whether this particular consumer need is going to be met or not in the market, or whether this particular product or the ingredient is going to satisfy a white space opportunity for that market or not. So I hope I answered the
Yes, yes,
question.
yes. Thank you.
Yeah,
I was just
yeah,
trying to find my unmute button to be able to
right.
to ask the next question. Thanks. So, are there more specific parts of the CPG generation process that are mainly responsible for the failure of the product?
Right. So I think on top of the, apart from the understanding of the consumer needs, I think a lot of the time the failure happens to communicate the product, right? So like essentially the marketing part of it. So many of the time the companies are not able to essentially sell the product or sell the USPs of the product, so to speak, right? So what I mean by that is, like, a particular product, what are the benefits of it? So many of the times, all of this is being done in a manual manner, where people are coming up with the write-ups and all, but then they don't really know whether that write-up actually attracts the consumers or not. Because once again, that write-up is tested on a sample set of consumers, right? And they don't really know whether these words are actually striking a chord with their audience. And that's where, like, again, the how the OpenAI GPT-3 or the other such technologies which are coming up can really leverage, because they have been trained on a data set which is like hugely there. And let's say if you train it on the past successful product concepts that were there, then you can essentially generate a description which involves, or which, like, kind of includes the parameters which already were successful in the past. So it's like, imbibing the right words or the right keywords, and then giving it out as a, like, a marketing like, campaign or a chapter or whatever. So I think that is where a lot of the work has now started happening. We can already see certain startups that are coming up, especially with this whole revolution which happened in the GPT-2 and GPT-3. And I think that's going to be another interesting space on how you can generate ads at scale, how you can generate the ads with the right language so as to strike a chord with your audience. Like, how do you explain the USP part to them? So I think that is going to be something which will be very interesting in the coming future.
Yeah, indeed. Then the next question I think you'll find interesting. So once
Okay.
AI is fully adopted for this process, can Reddit community coordinate to trick a company to launch a certain product?
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah, possibly. I won't be surprised. I mean, uh, the way that they can, I mean, I am not sure if they can trick a company, a big company, but they can definitely, I mean, like, have their, yeah, or, I mean, even a big company for that matter, right? So for example, like if they start playing around with the stock of a particular company for that matter, a publicly listed company, and they can definitely pressurize them into, like, launching a particular product. Or many of the times, I think on the platforms like Twitter, you are seeing these petitions being launched, right, to launch a particular, or to bring back something from the past. I remember there was this I think in one of the countries, I forgot the name, where a petition was filed to bring back the fries in the McDonald's, right? So, and people were like, and similarly, there was another one to bring a sauce in the KFC. I think it was some specific sauce which was there. So I think, yes, people in the past have tried ways to, like, bring back, because I think food is something which is very close to heart for the people, right? People love to talk passionately about food. I think there are millions of foodies that are around the world, and it is a basic need of the human being, right? And it will continue to be there for the generations ahead. So I think it is definitely like, there's a possibility in the future that, people are able to communicate with the big brands directly, and then, like, have their consumer needs directly satisfied, either through the channels, or, like, or through, like, a channel like Reddit or Twitter or whatever for that matter,
Or tricking the algorithms?
or triggering the algorithm. Yeah.
Okay, we do not have any more questions. So unless a new question pops up right now, I would like to
Okay.
thank you for coming today. Well, joining remotely from Singapore. Maybe
Right.
last
No
question,
worries.
you mentioned like on the last slide, you had this nice list of what people can do to get into
Right.
AI and data science. And
Right.
you mentioned interns. Are you hiring interns right now?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, we continue to hire any point of time if we find someone who is like really passionate about the AI and especially about the food. I think we are more than happy to talk and like
Mhm.
accommodate them because as you can see there are like a lot of applications, not just in the NLP space but in the computer vision space, the prediction part, and also yeah, if we come across someone good and who is really passionate, we will be more than happy to talk.
Mhm. And are you remote or like the person needs to
Uh,
be in Singapore?
Right. So in Singapore, fortunately, since the COVID situation is under control, so we have started coming back to office. Right now, I'm actually in my office,
Yeah,
and
just
yeah, yeah. And for the India team that we have, right now they are working remotely because
Mhm,
I think India, the situation is still not there yet. I think it's going to take some time
mhm.
before we can reopen our India office. But yeah, at the same time, if someone is like really, really good, we would be more than happy to have him as remote as well. There's no barrier as long as the the person is dedicated enough.
Okay, I will share the links to your website, so you can just
Sure,
find it in
sure.
chat, and it's
Yeah.
aipalette dot what
Cool.
com or
Yeah, airpilot.com. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
put the link in YouTube chat,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
that's all. Thanks a lot for coming and sharing it with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, thank you
And
so much, Alexei, for the opportunity, and I hope it was useful for the audience. And yeah, and thank you for having this platform. I think it really is much needed in this age of the applications of AI and AI as an evolving field. And like, yeah, good luck to you for the future sessions.
thank you.